And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres. It is Saturday, April 20th, 2024, coming to you from Long Beach, California. Got a big episode in store for you guys. We got the Oregon recruiting hour, so we'll have tons of Duck football and recruiting talk on today's episode. But before we get to that, the Ducks Dish podcast is brought to you in part by Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Not sure what your guys' dinner plans are tonight, but you can find them over at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. They got homemade tortillas, great food, great environment, and they'll take care of you. They're even hosting a Oregon fan meetup after the spring game next weekend. So head on over to Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Tell Ruben that Max sent you. So I'm not rolling solo on today's episode. I'm joined by my guy, Justin Hopkins, the owner and publisher of Scoop Duck. How we doing, man? Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and I guess we got quite a few things to talk about.
We certainly do. We certainly do. I mean, for starters, it's obviously been a big week for us with me coming back to Scoop Duck and joining the On3 network. It's pretty surreal in a sense, just because we've known each other for a long time, but I was kind of doing my thing, and then now it's like two forces unite. And we got Wiltfong and Simmons in the network now. So the scoop is just insane right now.
Yeah, I just, I knew that this merging or whatever you want to call it was going to be a great thing for us, but the reaction on Twitter and the reaction on Scoop Duck has just been, I think, even more than I expected. And I'm glad, because I feel like you and I are going to give our readers, a lot of bang for their buck, and that's what it's all about. So I'm super stoked on this.
I'm super stoked too. It's been awesome getting up to speed over on scoopduck.com. We're running a little promo right now. You can get $1 1 month for $1. And you can read all my stuff, Justin's stuff, and then, as I talked about, Steve Wiltfong and Chad Simmons as well. So been a fun week, and we got a big weekend on our hands here, Justin, for Oregon on the recruiting trail, as Dan Lanning and the Ducks are bringing in a lot of big visitors for this weekend. They're holding their second spring scrimmage, and we got some big names to talk about. I know we kind of touched on which ones we wanted to hit on here, but I'll throw it to you to start from some of the guys that we talked about.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I'm a big fan of two things. I think in terms of recruiting, obviously you want to lock in the in-state talent, if there's any around you. For Oregon, sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. Secondly, and in this case, you want to keep your commits committed. And I think, for Oregon, that's Dallas Wilson, has obviously steadily rose in the rankings and is now up to a 5-star. Like, he's a dude. Like, this isn't just a receiver out of Florida. This is a legit elite wide receiver. And I was talking to QB11 a little bit about him the other day, and just, after watching film, and like, this guy does it all. He literally is just super talented, super fluid, catches the ball really well. I mean, just does everything you want in a receiver. He even went so far as to say he's, currently probably better than Troy Franklin at the same point in their careers. So that's pretty lofty comparison, for anybody, but for a guy like Dallas Wilson, getting him on campus is big. And we both know that. Here's why I think it's the best thing for Oregon. Florida State, Miami, they're all pushing. But, Oregon recently hired Rashad Samples, as you and I both know, who does coach running backs, but has done a lot of work with wide receivers, which is what he, the position he held at ASU. This is now Dallas Wilson's first chance to meet with Coach Samples at Oregon, get to know him. And we know Junior Adams is an amazing recruiter, does a great job. Now you've got two really highly touted recruiters, Junior Adams, Rashad Samples, both that are going to be able to work on Wilson. And that's why I went with him first and mentioned him first. Again, get the in-state guys, keep your guys committed. And I think that's what Oregon really needs to do here with Dallas Wilson.
And the interesting thing with Dallas, Justin, for me, is that his recruiting journey has been pretty unique. He was very vocal about his affection for the Ducks leading up to his offer. I think it was Adrian Clem that was out there and offered him, and he committed on the spot. Which kind of takes me back to the NCAA football days where you were building your team and you had like the insta commit every now and then. But Dallas Wilson has continued to rise as one of the best receivers in the country, and he's also the face of Oregon's efforts in the state of Florida. Him, along with Sandman Thompson, the offensive lineman committed in 2025. And they have a unique challenge here that they have to get him all the way across the country from Florida to Eugene, which is not an easy thing to do by any means. If you've flown to the Eugene airport, you know what I mean by that. But a follow-up I had for you, Justin, you talked about how Junior Adams is a great recruiter. Rashad Samples is a great recruiter. What does that mean? Is it relationship building, eval? What is it for you?
For me, it is relationships are paramount. And I think, you could be a good recruiter and maybe kind of talk a guy into committing, or, and I think we see that around the country. Put a little pressure on somebody to commit. Hey, lock in your spot. We want you. Jump in the boat. We'll figure it out. But I think relationship building is what gets you over the finish line, right? And I think that, for Oregon, Junior Adams, Rashad Samples, who's now starting his relationship with Dallas Wilson, that's important. The other thing is effort, right? We hear it talked about a lot, but Oregon doesn't take these guys for granted. I'm talking about Dallas Wilson, Akili Smith, the early commits. They don't just get them committed and then kind of shuffle them off and go find other guys. They do a good job of maintaining those relationships, maintaining that effort, showing these guys why they covet them, why they want them as part of the class. So to me, it's in today's world, it's relationship and effort. Of course, we could talk about NIL and how that enters the mix. And in certain recruitments, that's a very big priority. And in other recruitments, it's like, hey, look, I just kind of want what's fair, or just, be close to what some of the other schools are offering. It can vary. So, of course, that's part of it. But if we take that out of the equation, which is, I kind of treat it as its own thing, it's relationship and effort in my book.
Love that. Love the insight. Dallas Wilson's the face of Oregon's class right now in 2025. And I think he's supposed to be out in Nashville next month at the On3 Elite Series, which I'm going to be at as well. So super stoked to try to get some one-on-one time with him and get to meet him. Let's continue running through this list of some of these visitors, Justin. One of the ones that kind of flew under the radar here is Blake Woodby. 2025 DB out of St. Francis Academy out in Baltimore, Maryland area. We know a lot about St. Francis, of course, because of Michael Van Buren in the 25 class. He ended up at Mississippi State, but then the Ducks got Ife Obadegwu, who is a talented DB. And Blake Woodby's committed to Ohio State, but he kind of just made his way out to Eugene. And for me, even though you posted that visit list, I feel like it's not a guy that's getting a whole lot of buzz right now, and that's a big visitor for Oregon.
Yeah, it's interesting because when Demetrius Martin was still here before he moved on to Michigan State, that was a guy that Oregon felt like they were probably behind Ohio State for, but not by much, right? And so then he does commit to Ohio State. And of course, if you're Oregon, you don't just move on. You don't just cross him off the list and say, well, he went to Ohio State, too bad. I mean, he had, 10 more months or whatever until he was going to sign with Ohio State or wherever he was going to go. So, if you're Oregon, you just kind of keep chipping away. And it comes down to, once again, what I just talked about. Of course, it's no longer Demetrius Martin, it's Chris Hampton. But, you start building that relationship and maintaining that relationship. And then next is the effort. You keep putting on the effort, and it starts with something as simple as, hey, just come take a quick visit, this weekend. Come check us out. Let's show you what we're all about. Come watch a scrimmage. And like I said, I mean, schools are not giving up on Dallas Wilson because, once again, it's 8 more months before he signs anything. It's the same for Blake Woodby and the others. I mean, keep going. If they're answering your phone calls, if they're being responsive, if they're showing interest, there's no reason to stop recruiting them. So I think Oregon's got a legitimate shot here with Woodby. And one of the things that I would look for is Ohio State is recruiting at a really high level, specifically in the secondary. And you kind of wonder, does Woodby end up feeling like he might be kind of lost in the shuffle a little bit with some of these other guys, jumping on board or potentially jumping on board for Ohio State? So, if you're Oregon, I think you look at it this way. And I know we're going to get into it, but Oregon and Ohio State are battling for a lot of guys in the secondary. And quite frankly, they can't sign them all. So if you're Oregon, you're kind of, we'll just keep going with all these guys and see where the chips fall.
And that I think I like that point in large part, Justin, because a lot of people ask me sometimes, Oregon's getting these great guys, these blue chippers, all Americans, 4 stars, 5 stars, but sometimes they don't hop in till late. And I think your answer was a big part of it. It's because Oregon plays the long game, and they, for whatever reason, they don't seem to get those really coveted guys early, except for Dallas Wilson, for example. Perfect example. Getting him early is huge. So I like what you had to say about them staying involved, and they can't sign all of them. And I think that they're also gonna. It sounds like I saw some buzz that they might get Naeem offered back on campus or on campus. I'm actually not even sure if he's been yet, but he's the 5-star corner committed to Ohio State right now out of Alabama, and he's top 10 in the country on some sites. So that's a massive visit. And I think that I also really like that Oregon's staying involved in the DMV area. Lots of talent out there. Dejon Riggs is the most recent guy that comes to mind, from Washington, D.C., running back in Oregon's 2024 class. So we'll see what's going on here with Oregon and Blake Woodby. Tons of really, really good connections on the staff. I think that correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Darren Usher is from that area as well, and he rejoined the staff after spending a season at UCLA, I think, or he was gonna join the UCLA staff. But they got all their connections. Hampton's working on it, I bet. Rashad Wadood and of course Lanning. So gonna be interesting. Make sure you keep an eye on Blake Woodby.
Definitely agree. I think that's one that Oregon has a legitimate shot at flipping. But of course, we'll just have to see what happens over the next 7-8 months.
All right, let's get into our next recruit here on the Oregon Recruiting Hour. Let's flip back over to the offensive side of the ball and maybe look a little bit down the road here in the 2026 class. One of the newest big names out west, certainly in Southern California, in my neck of the woods, Santa Ana Mater Dei wide receiver Chris Henry Jr., who just so happens to also be committed to Ohio State. You talked about it, Justin. Ryan Day and the Buckeyes are just doing some crazy things on the recruiting trail right now. But Henry's going to take his first visit out to Oregon this weekend, is currently on campus. And I got to see him at Under Armour Los Angeles, and that dude is a dude for sure. Every bit of 6'5", moves really well. And it's important for Oregon to be involved here, even though he's, like I said, down the road in 26.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about 2025s that are 7 to 8 months out. Well, go ahead and add another year on to that for Henry. So yeah, there's absolutely no reason not to. I mean, two things. It's smart for Henry to keep some other options open, because you have no idea what could happen at Ohio State for the next 18 months, right? That's a lifetime in college football. I mean, just think about it. 18 months ago, and the Pac-12 was still in existence, right? You get my point. So yeah, take some visits, keep your options open a little bit. And if you're Oregon, the phrase I like to use is you're chopping wood, right? Just keep chopping wood. Okay. You don't need to knock down the tree on the first swing. You're just kind of chipping away at it, wanting to stay in the game. And you did mention on something really good, and doesn't necessarily apply here, but we know that Oregon likes to, basically kind of come in late on some guys. They relationship build, and then when it gets down to the nitty gritty, they like to kind of sneak in at the last minute. So, with Henry, we're not even talking about that just yet, but again, the rivalry remains. It used to be Oregon and USC. It was Oregon and Washington a little bit on the recruiting trail. It's 100% turned into Oregon versus Ohio State for a lot of these guys. And there's more that you and I will talk about that are, once again, Oregon versus Ohio State. And we got another one. This guy, I didn't say it, and I know we're watching some film. This kid's truly elite, absolutely special, and 100% worth all of the effort Oregon's going to pour into him over the next year.
And Chris Henry, I think he also is a great player in terms of just where the game is headed at wide receiver. That I think I kind of started to realize when you had like your T. Higgins at Clemson, and they just have longer, faster wide receivers who just have like crazy catch radiuses, like Chris Henry here. But he's going to be pretty much one of the biggest names out west here, regardless of class, I think, this upcoming season. And Mater Dei is a program that I've gotten to spend a lot of time around. Marcus Harris, another Oregon wide receiver target, is over there as well, and Oregon State involved. But it's always interesting to watch the Mater Deis and the St. John Boscos, because I think sometimes people can get caught up with the name or with the stargazing. But for everything that we've seen and heard from Chris Henry, he's every bit as good as his billing suggests early on, as he makes this move out west to face, frankly, better competition than he saw in Cincinnati.
Yeah. And I like your point there. And I think you're right. I think a lot of times that if people are looking at a profile and they see a kid and see, hey, he plays at Mater Dei, or he plays at St. John Bosco, or he plays at IMG, they automatically assume he's good. And there are some of those players that do tend to get a little bit, I think, overvalued by the people who actually rank, kids, and then folks that just follow it because of where they go to school. Now, that said, that does not apply to Chris Henry. He's a legit dude, no matter where he's going to school. And quite frankly, he's probably the best receiver on their roster today.
It's a loaded group at Mater Dei. It always is. They also got Dash Beerley in, the Washington commit, who transferred from Chaparral and Temecula out to Mater Dei. So you get a little bit of shift with the roster, but as we've seen in recent cycles here, Justin, Oregon's going to continue staying around Mater Dei for the foreseeable future. We're talking some Oregon football recruiting here on the Ducks Dish podcast, also coming to you on the Scoop Duck YouTube channel here on a Saturday morning. So appreciate you guys for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Gonna hopefully bring Justin on the channel a bit more, but all of my video content's gonna be here. So this is your new home for Oregon football recruiting, and I want to make sure you guys stay locked in. Let's zoom out a little bit here, Justin, in the bigger picture, 2025. Before we talk about some more specific guys, Oregon's heading into their spring game next week, and that's always been the weekend for Oregon recruiting. And it's kind of crazy to think about, because this weekend's visitor list is star-studded in its own right. But I wanted to get some of your thoughts about where Oregon stands right now, just in the 2025 class, in their pursuit. I know we're kind of managing some numbers and trying to get a feel for where they're going to really make some priorities, but I feel like you got to be confident if you're Dan Lanning and the staff about where you're at right now and you're ready to make some big noise.
Yeah, I know I've said this on Scoop Duck, which doesn't necessarily mean it's been on here, everybody's heard it, but I'll say it again. This is going to be a class built on quality, not quantity. And the reason for that is they've done such a great job recruiting in the last two cycles. And we know that this roster is really talented. It's really more now about finding guys that, hey, look, this guy's special. We feel like he's going to be able to contribute, probably closer to right away or within a couple of years. They're not looking to pull in dead weight and backfill depth, if that makes sense. And Oregon's almost always had to do that. And it doesn't mean that they won't take some, upside developmental guys. And you're going to do that along the line of scrimmage, probably every cycle, right? You're going to find an edge or a nose tackle or an offensive lineman that you say, hey, look, this kid's 6'8", 300 pounds, doesn't know how to move his feet yet, but we'll take him and we'll figure it out because he's 6'8", 300 pounds. You could see a little bit of that, but Oregon, more than, for the most part, isn't going to just take a lot of filler in this class. So I'm not saying that they're going to sign only 10 guys. Okay, because that's not realistic at all. But we've seen them pushing it up to 30 in the last couple of years. And I don't think that number is attainable this year with what you have on the roster. And the reason for that is I don't think there's much dead weight on this roster that you can actually push out and make room for. So, I think you're going to be a little closer to, we used to see Mario was really big on this, one out, one in, right? So if you had a running back that was graduating or leaving early for the draft, you would go sign one running back. One out, one in. And, for this year, I don't know that that's really the case. So I guess my bigger point is this. It's probably going to be a number closer to 20 than to 30 this year. And secondly, it's going to be more bigger fish. Now, that doesn't mean that, we're just signing 5 stars. That's all that's happening. That's not realistic. All right. You're looking at top 200 guys, top 250 guys, and then again, some outliers that maybe you value more than others. But that said, those upper end, as you know, as well as I do, those top 100, top 50 guys, even if they make an early commitment, which is kind of the new norm, they're still taking other visits, which is what they should do. And so if you're Oregon, you're kind of waiting on some of these guys. I feel like the class is going to fill up maybe just a little bit later than normal because of the fact that they're kind of going, big game hunting, if you will. So, we've seen Oregon fill up halfway to 2/3 of the class come like July or August. And they might do that again this year, but they might not. And it's okay, because a lot of these 5-stars that, you and I will talk about it at certain points, those aren't the guys that you rush to make an early decision. You're waiting on them. And I think there's going to be more fireworks in December than usual this year.
Yeah, it seems like that's usually when the fireworks come. But also, to your point, the way that the calendar has kind of gone typically in recent years is they do a lot of that heavy lifting in the spring and summer months. So when the season comes around, you can focus on the on-field product, and then those blue chip guys that you really, really want, your Josh Connerleys, your Mateo Uyungleleles, the guys like that. And then you also can push ahead to the next cycle, which, as we know now, is 2026. So I'm excited to see what the Ducks can do in that class. Let's talk about our next guy here. I was going to talk about maybe an Oregon, Ohio State again, but we're going to flip it up a little bit. Let's talk about Josiah Sharma. He's a big time defensive lineman, out of Northern California at Folsom, which is also home to Rider Lions. Jameson Powell, some talented offensive guys in the 26 class. So let's see. Josiah Sharma, he's going to be at the Seattle Under Armour camp on Sunday, and hopefully going to be able to chop it up with him and get to meet him. But he looks, Justin, like one of your better, bigger defensive linemen out west this cycle. And it's important for Oregon to hone in on him, because you don't have a lot of big bodies like Jericho Johnson, Aiden Breland, or even like an Elijah Rushing from Arizona this cycle.
Yeah. And so I just talked about this a moment ago, right? If you're, for Oregon, you're looking for the firepower, you're looking for the 4-stars and the 5-stars. Sharma's not really that, right? I mean, I know with On3, we have him ranked as a 4-star, but if you look at the other services, they do not. So he's not like a consensus 4-star. He's actually, I think his On3 ranking is somewhere in the 400s. Okay. So he's 6'3". He's over 300 pounds, 320, whatever the case he is, whatever, how much he weighs. And he's a defensive lineman. So yeah, you're going to take him, and maybe he's a developmental guy, needs a year or two to grow, change his body weight, his body composition. All those things are fine. He's one of those guys you're going to kind of take a flyer on, if you will. And for 2 reasons: because he's a defensive lineman, because you can't teach, 6'4", 300 pounds or whatever he is. And furthermore, you keep him away from Washington and USC and UCLA and everybody on the West Coast that you're going to see, in the Big Ten potentially. So it's kind of a double dip, if you will. I think this is a guy that Oregon has decided that they're going to push a little bit harder for, because of there is some upside there, and B, there is not a lot of talented defensive linemen out west in this cycle. So they don't need a ton of them because of the recruiting they've done the past couple of years. But I mean, you and I both know Dan Lanning's always going to recruit some defensive linemen every cycle. So I think Sharma's moved up the board for Oregon. I believe this is his first visit to Oregon, which makes it a really big visit and a chance for Oregon to kind of get in the game here, if you will.
And with, you talked about the defensive lineman. Like, if there's a position that you can afford to have a lot of guys at, and you probably want to have a lot of bodies at, it's along the D line. And I was looking through some pictures the other day just of practice, and I saw some of these guys that Oregon signed in the 23 class, like a Terrence Green or a Jaden Moore, that you just don't hear talked about very much, and that maybe weren't as highly rated as recruits. But you look at them now, Justin, after 1 year in the system, and you're like, man, these guys are huge. They've put on some good muscle. They look like their bodies are more ready for college football. And they also, I feel like I'm a broken record saying this, but I feel like we can't overestimate, or maybe underestimate, I'm saying it's really, really important, the development that these guys got learning behind your Popos, your Casey Rogers and Brandon Dorlises, because they're going to take those tools now to the field with them, with some of these guys poised for bigger roles in 24.
Yeah, typically, if you're taking a recruit that plays on the line of scrimmage, and that's on defense or on offense, okay, maybe I would say outside of like edge on defense, if you're taking a recruit and they're starting for you that first year, you're probably in a little bit of trouble as a program. And that's not to say that applies to everybody, but if you took it, it's like 90%, that those first year guys just aren't ready. They don't have the strength. They don't have the technique. You know what I mean? It's a long season. It's a longer season now than it's ever been. So yeah, you shouldn't feel bad that a guy like Green or potentially Sharma or Amari Washington or the guys that are on the roster have taken a year to develop, because like you said, the nutrition, the sports science, the weightlifting, the conditioning, all those things are paramount to their body composition. It doesn't mean that they're losing weight or gaining weight. They're more than likely just changing their body composition from a little bit more fat to a little bit more muscle, and it being, more of what's the word I want to look for? It's the it's the active muscle. It's the muscle you want, not just like, hey, I'm big, strong, look at me. It's the muscle they need to sustain playing time over a game and over a season. So again, a guy like Sharma, you take him, and if he doesn't contribute for 2 years, it doesn't mean he's a bust. He just needed the changes necessary. And that I really do believe applies to the line of scrimmage more than anything else in the game.
Great points. Great points. We're already almost up to 30 minutes. Like you mentioned, Justin, before we hit record, we are just loaded with guys to talk about. But let's talk about one more dude in particular who's on campus this weekend. That is Cleveland, Ohio, Shaker Heights athlete Trey McNutt. He is actually being viewed and I think recruited by Oregon as a DB, as a safety more specifically. But this is a 5-star guy who's been on Oregon's radar a little bit more recently, I think. But this is a guy that Rashad Wadood is working on. I know that he had really good things to say about Oregon when I was talking to him before or after one of his recent visits to Oregon. But this guy is as coveted as they come in the defensive backfield. And I think, I don't want to say this critically, but I feel like Oregon's left a little bit to be desired when it comes to recruiting some of these higher end safeties. You always see them involved with these guys, but now you need to see them land them and get your next Javon Holland or your Verone McKinley, some kind of a star safety in the fold here, specifically in 2025, because you're in on a lot of really good guys.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, this isn't, you make a great point, and I totally agree with you. And, I want to back it up. Obviously, this is nothing really to do with Chris Hampton, who's basically just entering the second year on his job. But you're right. It's been kind of this drought for years of really just finding a playmaking safety. And to support that comment that you've made, and I agree with, look where Oregon's been active in the transfer portal the last 2 years. They've gone after safeties pretty consistently, and they've had to do it again this year to supplement, that. And so I totally agree with you. I think Flowers is going to be a good one at Oregon. Signed him, in this last class, but that's kind of the first one in a while. And as well, to your point, McNutt's a really good one, and again, Oregon versus Ohio State here is what it kind of looks like early on, once again. And, it's not the only one. We got Fahim Delane that we're not even going to talk about today, but that's another safety. Oregon versus Ohio State kind of looks like the battle there with some others. So, yeah, McNutt, Delane, some of these safeties that we're talking about, Oregon absolutely needs to get one or two, or heaven, please, 3 would be even better. But yeah, they need to get a couple, and that will help them be able to, stop relying on the transfer portal for safety, which has been kind of a hit or miss position in the transfer portal. I mean, it's just been, Oregon. I think Savage is going to be really good for Oregon. I know we'll talk about a safety in the transfer portal in a minute. We can talk about that, but it's not always loaded with surefire elite dudes. If you think about it, there was Downs this year. There was Savage. I can't really think of too many others that were like a sure thing in the portal at safety. Receiver, you can find tons of. Quarterback, you can find in the transfer portal easily. There's lots of positions you could supplement. Safety feels like it's a little bit hard. It'd be nice for them to get a couple guys, let them get some playing time next year. Doesn't mean they have to start, but they could play and be ready to go for a couple of years after that. McNutt is a dude. This guy is an absolute dude, and just very much feels like a guy Dan Lanning would like in his defense. Not because he's a 5-star, but I think he's just really good all around. He's not a liability in pass coverage, totally not afraid to come and mix it up in the box and make a tackle. And I think they really like those type of safeties.
And like you mentioned, Oregon's after a handful of them. So while you want to get as many as you can, it kind of stands to reason maybe that the more that you're involved in, the better chance you have of getting at least one of these guys. But also, I think a lot of the guys we've talked about at safety, it's not their first time coming out to Oregon. That's I think that speaks to the groundwork and the legwork that the staff has done. You get some of these guys out, a year ahead, right? We talked about 2026 being the next cycle. If you look at these guys last season, they were getting them out for visits during the season. Come see a game, just hang out and tell us what you think. And then now, once they are kind of more on the clock, so to speak, here in the spring, things get a bit more real. You get them out for another unofficial, and then like for a junior day type of a deal. And then now the spring and summer months come around, and you're able to get that official visit and then hopefully seal the deal. So it seems like Trey McNutt has a little bit more to go in his recruitment. I haven't seen anything as far as him getting close to the finish line, but you mentioned a guy, kind of alluded to him at the safety position, that I want to make sure we hit on before we get out of here today. Earlier this week, Oregon was tied to Texas A&M safety transfer Jacoby Matthews. I talked about him in Torres's take over on Scoop Duck. Give that a read if you haven't already. But Justin, there was a lot made about Oregon and Florida State kind of being viewed as the front runners. But I reached out to one of my connections at Oregon, and they were kind of telling him that we're not really pushing for him, telling me that they're not really pushing for Jacoby Matthews right now. So seemed like it was something that caught a lot of people's eyes. Former 5-star recruit, big DB, could be at Oregon for a couple of years, but maybe it makes sense to pump the brakes here a little bit because that's the latest intel that we're hearing.
Yeah, and pump the brakes is the great way to do it, because I think at no point are you and I saying that Oregon won't take him. That's not what we're saying. I think we're just saying that right now everybody's basically saying Oregon is the team to beat. And so then, of course, the fan reaction is, oh, we're getting him. And I think if you're Oregon right now, I mean, we haven't even hit one full week of the spring transfer portal window, right? And you've got a bunch. You had quite a few spring games that were played last Saturday. You'll have that same amount played today. And, typically the spring game is obviously the end of spring football for those schools. And so you'll have guys kind of make their decisions after those spring games, like if they want to hit the portal or not. And so my point to that is, yes, Oregon's being linked to Matthews all over the place as the team to beat, whatever you want. I think Oregon's just in wait and see mode here. Like, okay, that's on the table. There's Matthews. We've watched film on him. We know where he's at. Let's see who else is going to jump in the portal. Is there maybe a better option? Is there somebody that fits what we need better? There's no reason for Oregon to push today to get Matthews. And I think that's what you and I are saying. Your pump the brakes phrase was exactly right. It's like, hey, let's just wait and see what else is gifted into the portal. And of course, if you're Dan Lanning and Hampton, you'll evaluate them and watch film, and maybe there's somebody that's a better fit. And I think the key is my last point, everybody is looking at Matthews and immediately it says former 5-star right in front of his name. Yeah, he was a 5-star, but if you look at his production and film from his 2 years at Texas A&M, it really hasn't been 5-star production. So is he still a 5-star? I mean, sure, there's talent there, but right now he's not playing like a 5-star. So, perhaps Oregon's just kind of wait and see. You and I both know most of these guys enter the portal, at least the elite guys, and they have a pretty good idea of where they're going already. So maybe Oregon's heard about some other guys that might potentially be entering, and they're like, again, pumping the brakes and in wait and see mode.
Yeah, so we're still in the earlier part, I guess you could say, of this window. I guess we're almost the halfway mark, right? It's a 2-week window here for the spring portal. So I think, yeah, you got to kind of wait and see. And you know that this staff is incredibly calculated, and they're more than likely not going to take a guy out of the portal unless they think he's going to contribute. That just speaks to the hit rate of this staff with the guys that they've brought over. And Oregon also has, I think, a little bit of a built-in advantage, or I guess just a benefit right now, being that they have a later spring game than most schools. So that just kind of gives you some more work, gives you some extra time. Like, hey, you want to go visit USC this weekend? That's great. Just come see us next weekend. So it gives you, I think, so might be lagging out. Can you see me, Justin? Can you hear me?
I can. You're back.
Sorry about that. Of course, but maybe that's a sign we got to get out of here. I think Oregon's in a good spot. They've calculated And I think next weekend should be a big one for the Ducks.
Absolutely. Next
All right,
weekend's
we
going to be
really
a
need to get
phenomenal
out of here because this thing is. Sorry, I cut you off. It's my internet's playing games on me. But final remarks, Justin. Sorry.
No, my final remark is you need to pay the internet bill, Max. What are you doing? No, I agree with everything, and I'm glad that we're back. More than anything, I'm glad that we're back together and looking forward to doing these with you.
I'm super stoked to be back at Scoop Duck, and thanks for bringing me back and all the support from everybody. If you guys want to find more of me and Justin, you can follow Justin on Twitter at jhopkinssd. You can follow me on Twitter at mtorresports. Sign up to scoopduck.com for $1. Get you a whole month to try us out because this is the time. I'm going to be in Eugene next week and plenty of recruiting coverage. So big thank you to Justin for coming on. Thank you to you guys for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.